The moment the news broke, the palace staff felt a ripple of shock that no one could ignore. It wasn't just another press release or routine royal announcement. No, this was personal. This was pointed. And most importantly, it was humiliating. Meghan Markle, the Duchess once celebrated for her poise and modernity, had just been handed a new title. But it wasn't one she would proudly display on invitations or monogram stationery. Instead, it was a thinly veiled public jab, whispered through the corridors of Buckingham Palace and echoed in the tabloids around the world. The new title? Duchess of Z-Listers. Can you even imagine the sting, the silent fury building behind the perfectly curated smile that Meghan had become known for? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about it for a moment. In a world where every glance, every title, every ceremony is a symbol of status and respect, what does it feel like to have your reputation subtly shredded in front of millions? Meghan, who had fought so hard to craft her image, poised, influential, undeniably royal, was suddenly painted with the brush of mockery. And it wasn't just a trivial joke. In the royal universe, titles carry weight, history, and prestige. They are badges of honor, rewards for loyalty, or marks of distinction. To have that stripped away or twisted into ridicule, it's the kind of humiliation that can seep into your bones, that can change the way the world perceives you in an instant. And for Meghan, the shock was immediate, visceral, and terrifyingly public. The story didn't start with the title itself. No, the tension had been brewing behind palace doors for months. Whispers, thinly veiled criticisms, and subtle digs had been accumulating in the background, each one a thread in a tapestry of humiliation. But the final act, the public title announcement, was a dagger in slow motion, and Meghan saw it coming only at the very last second. Imagine being handed an official notification, your name etched in formal lettering, your royal identity suddenly transformed into a punchline. That moment, captured only by a handful of palace insiders and discreet aides, was enough to ignite fury that no amount of etiquette or PR training could contain. Now, let's pause and consider the human side of this. We often see Meghan through the lens of tabloids and media narratives, but in that room, in that instant, she was just a woman confronting the sharp edge of tradition, expectation, and outright mockery. Emotions flared. Words were exchanged. Behind closed doors, Meghan's reaction was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and an almost childlike hurt that comes from being dismissed in a realm where image is everything. She paced, she gestured, and reportedly, she even laughed. A bitter, incredulous laugh that carried more tension than humor. It was a laugh that said, "I can't believe this." But also, "You've underestimated me, and that's a mistake you will regret." You might be asking, why would King Charles do such a thing? Why, after years of public scrutiny and careful diplomacy, would he seemingly choose to humiliate Meghan in this manner? The answer, as insiders suggest, lies in a mixture of palace politics, personal grievances, and a desire to assert control over the narrative surrounding the Sussexes. Charles, known for his strategic thinking and sharp wit, is not a man who acts without reason. Every move in the palace is calculated, every gesture observed and measured. And in this case, assigning Meghan a title that subtly mocked her social standing was both a power play and a statement. It sent a message not only to Meghan but to the world. Even in the modern monarchy, appearances, influence, and loyalty are currency, and missteps have consequences. But let's dive deeper into the implications of such a title. To the public, Duchess of Z-Listers reads as a joke, almost playful in tone. But in the exclusive circles of the royals, it's a rebuke of immense proportions. It's a critique of celebrity culture, of influence, and of perceived social climbing. For Meghan, whose life before the monarchy involved navigating Hollywood, media scrutiny, and personal branding, the sting was double. This wasn't just a palace jab. It was a reflection of the world she once inhabited, now weaponized against her in the very institution she had married into. The irony is cruel, and the drama palpable. At the same time, the public's reaction added fuel to the fire. Within minutes of the leaks and unofficial reports surfacing, social media erupted. Memes circulated, some sympathetic, some mocking. Headlines screamed, fueling the narrative that Meghan had been publicly humiliated. People debated the ethics, the intentions, and the history behind royal titles. Every post, tweet, and comment became part of the spectacle, and Meghan, whether she wanted to or not, was at the center of it. The world was watching. And for someone who carefully manages her image, there is nothing more enraging, more destabilizing, than losing control of your own story. Meanwhile, inside the palace, tensions were rising. Staffers whispered in hallways. Aides scrambled to prepare responses and manage public perception. The air was thick with anticipation, anxiety, and a dash of fear. How would Meghan respond? Would she retaliate publicly, privately, or retreat into silence? And what would Harry do, caught between loyalty to his wife and the complex dynamics of his family? These questions loomed large, creating a palpable tension that would not dissipate anytime soon. And yet, amidst all the chaos, one detail stands out. Meghan's reaction was not simply about pride or vanity. It was about identity. To be assigned a title that undermined her social and personal achievements was to have her very existence in the public eye reframed as trivial, a mere accessory to gossip rather than a respected figure. It's the kind of slight that resonates deeply, challenging one's sense of self and agency. For Meghan, this was not just a royal slight. It was an existential affront, a test of resilience and cunning that would reveal both her character and her strategy in the coming weeks. So where do we go from here? How does a woman, once celebrated and scrutinized in equal measure, navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics, public opinion, and personal betrayal? How does she respond to a title designed to mock, belittle, and redefine her place in the monarchy? These are questions that would occupy Meghan, Harry, palace insiders, and the media alike. And as we delve into the unfolding story, the stakes only rise. Each reaction, each countermove, and each whispered leak contributes to a drama that is as riveting as it is unpredictable. And just when you think you've grasped the full weight of this humiliation, the story takes another turn. Behind the scenes, sources reveal that the title was not the only jab. There were gestures, remarks, and subtle insinuations strategically placed to amplify the sting. Each one calculated, each one designed to push Meghan closer to the edge of fury. It all began on a morning that seemed ordinary, almost mundane, in the vast, echoing halls of Buckingham Palace. Courtiers were bustling, aides were checking schedules, and the world outside was unaware of the storm about to hit. Yet, behind the heavy doors and velvet curtains, a single envelope carried news that would reverberate through the royal family and across social media worldwide. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, had just received a notification. A formal document from the King's office. But this was no ordinary communiqué. No congratulatory letter or ceremonial invitation awaited her. Instead, it was an official declaration that altered her public identity in a way no one could have predicted. She was now to be publicly recognized as the Duchess of Z-Listers. The reaction was instantaneous. Meghan's eyes widened as she absorbed the words. At first, there was disbelief. A brief pause where her mind raced to process the insult disguised as a title. How could this happen? How could a monarchy, an institution steeped in centuries of protocol and tradition, weaponize the very language meant to honor and elevate? The title itself, innocuous at a glance, carried a sharp sting. In a world obsessed with rank, prestige, and influence, being labeled a Z-lister was more than a joke. It was a deliberate slight, a statement of dismissal and derision from the very pinnacle of authority. The palace staff, who had been present during the delivery of the notification, described a mixture of shock and tension in the room. A silence fell over the chamber, thick and palpable, broken only by Meghan's sharp intake of breath. Harry, standing beside her, clenched his fists almost imperceptibly, caught between his protective instincts and the need to maintain composure. It was a moment charged with raw emotion, one that would later be dissected by every commentator and gossip columnist with a keyboard. But in that instant, none of it mattered. The humiliation was private, yet it felt monumental. Palace insiders would later reveal that the title was not chosen at random. It was a carefully crafted insult, a mixture of humor and strategic public messaging, designed to communicate several subtle messages at once. Firstly, it implied that Meghan's influence and relevance were secondary, even trivial, within the grand hierarchy of royalty. Secondly, it served as a reminder of the king's authority and the hierarchical nature of the institution. And finally, it was a warning, a signal to the public and to Meghan herself that her position, while publicly prominent, was ultimately subordinate to the traditional power structures of the monarchy. But why choose this moment, and why this particular phrasing? Sources close to the palace suggest that months of tension and unspoken resentments had been simmering beneath the surface. Meghan, known for her assertiveness and independence, had often clashed with traditionalists within the royal household. Her modern approach to publicity, social causes, and personal branding was frequently at odds with the conventional, measured approach expected of royals. The king, aware of these frictions, reportedly saw an opportunity to reassert his authority while sending a pointed message. The choice of a title that mocked, rather than honored, was deliberate, a calculated move to provoke a reaction and establish dominance in the public eye. Meghan's initial response was a complex blend of emotions. Anger, humiliation, disbelief, and a flicker of dark humor all played across her face. Observers described her as momentarily stunned, her mind racing through every possible angle of response. Should she confront the king directly, demand a retraction, or strategically ignore the slight in favor of a more measured approach? Every instinct she had, honed from years navigating media scrutiny and public perception, screamed for action. Yet the palace environment, with its centuries-old rules and expectations, constrained her options. This was not just a personal insult. It was a test of her ability to maneuver within the rigid structures of royal decorum. Meanwhile, Harry was acutely aware of the implications. His protective instincts flared, but he also understood the broader ramifications. Any overt reaction could escalate the situation, potentially igniting a media firestorm and destabilizing the careful public image they had built together. His loyalty to Meghan was absolute, yet he was painfully aware of the delicate balance of power at play. This was not merely about a title. It was about influence, perception, and the subtle warfare that had long existed behind the palace walls. The timing of the announcement was equally significant. Delivered just as Meghan was preparing for a series of public engagements, it served to undermine her confidence and distract from her initiatives. The title's impact was amplified by the immediacy of social media and the omnipresence of global media coverage. Within minutes of the initial leak, news outlets were speculating, commenters were debating, and the online world was flooded with reactions ranging from amusement to outrage. In an instant, what might have remained a private humiliation became a public spectacle, magnifying the sting exponentially. And yet, the story of the Duchess of Z-Listers is more than a tale of humiliation. It is a window into the intricate, often ruthless world of royal politics. Every word, every gesture, every seemingly trivial decision carries weight. The choice of a title, ostensibly ceremonial, becomes a weapon. Personal identity, public perception, and private emotion intersect in ways that are as dramatic as they are unpredictable. Meghan's new title was not simply a label. It was a statement about power, control, and the unyielding scrutiny faced by anyone daring to challenge tradition. As the day progressed, Meghan's inner circle worked frantically to assess the fallout. Advisors debated how best to respond, balancing the need for dignity with the imperative to protect her public image. Messages were drafted, strategists were consulted, and every potential angle was considered. But Meghan's personal reaction remained the focal point. Reports suggest that she alternated between moments of sharp, strategic thinking and raw emotional response, a testament to the intensity of the insult and the high stakes involved. Observers described a scene of controlled chaos, a delicate dance of loyalty, strategy, and emotional resilience playing out behind closed doors. But the palace intrigue did not stop there. Word of the title quickly spread beyond the walls, reaching allies, detractors, and the ever-watchful public. Analysts began dissecting the implications, comparing Meghan's situation to historical precedents, and speculating on potential consequences. The story quickly became a case study in the delicate interplay of image, influence, and hierarchy. For Meghan, the challenge was immediate and pressing. how to navigate a world that had suddenly turned a sharp eye on her, interpreting every gesture, every word, through the lens of this new, humiliating designation. In that charged atmosphere, every conversation, every movement, every decision carried the potential for escalation. The title of Duchess of Z-Listers was more than a mere label. It was a provocation. And provocation demands a response. Meghan faced a choice: retreat, retaliate, or outmaneuver the forces that sought to diminish her. The stakes were unprecedented, the scrutiny unrelenting, and the consequences far-reaching. Every eye in the palace, and indeed in the world beyond, was on her. And Meghan knew that whatever she did next would not only define her public image, but also shape the narrative of her entire tenure within the royal family. As evening approached, the tension reached a breaking point. Meghan, now fully aware of the weight and implications of her new title, made a decision. She would not allow this insult to define her. She would not quietly accept what many would consider an irreparable slight. But what exactly she would do, how she would respond, and who she would enlist as allies remained uncertain. The palace, meanwhile, was buzzing with speculation. Some feared confrontation, others anticipated a dramatic rebuttal, and a few predicted an unprecedented act that could shock even the most seasoned royal observers. And so, the stage was set. The announcement had been made, the title delivered, and the reactions ignited a storm of emotion, strategy, and speculation. Meghan's world, and by extension the royal family's carefully curated image, had shifted in an instant. Every decision, every glance, every whisper from that moment forward carried amplified significance. And while the public only saw headlines and social media commentary, behind the palace doors, a far more intricate and dramatic story was unfolding. Meghan's next moves would not just be about survival. They would be about asserting power, reclaiming respect, and navigating a landscape riddled with intrigue, loyalty, and betrayal. The palace is a world built on discretion, whispered conversations, and carefully curated appearances. Secrets are currency, and loyalty is often measured in silence. Yet, when news of Meghan's new title, the Duchess of Z-Listers, leaked, the controlled environment of Buckingham Palace began to unravel. What should have remained a private embarrassment quickly became fodder for insiders eager to share details, either out of allegiance to tradition, curiosity, or the desire to control the narrative. And when sources began speaking, the story that emerged was far more explosive than anyone outside the palace could have imagined. One aide, speaking under strict anonymity, described the atmosphere in the days following the announcement as tense, electric, and almost theatrical. Meghan, they said, was visibly furious. Her usual calm, measured demeanor gave way to sharp words, impatient gestures, and, at moments, what insiders described as quiet, simmering rage. Harry, while attempting to maintain his composure, was equally shaken. The palace had suddenly transformed into a stage, with Meghan and Harry at the center, navigating an intricate web of observation, judgment, and expectation. According to multiple sources, the leaks began almost immediately. Courtiers, staffers, and even some distant relatives seemed unable to contain their reactions. Rumors of Meghan's fury circulated quickly, amplified by those who had access to the palace corridors and private chambers. It was like watching a live domino effect, one insider explained. Every whisper triggered another, and suddenly the whole household knew. But the public had no idea of the scale of what had happened. These leaks revealed more than just Meghan's emotional response. They painted a vivid picture of the strategic thinking behind the king's decision and the ripple effects it created. Charles, as sources explained, had long been frustrated with what he perceived as Meghan's disregard for royal protocol. Her bold initiatives, public statements, and independent approach to media engagement had often clashed with the palace's traditionalist culture. The title, seemingly innocuous to outsiders, was in reality a subtle, calculated dig. It was a reminder that, in the eyes of the monarchy, rank, respect, and obedience remain foundational, and that deviations from tradition can carry consequences. Interestingly, the leaks also exposed a divide within the palace itself. Some aides and staffers were sympathetic to Meghan, recognizing the cruelty of the title and the personal blow it represented. Others seemed to take satisfaction in the drama, interpreting the title as a clever assertion of power by the king. This division only heightened the tension, creating an environment in which every interaction was layered with suspicion and strategy. You could feel it in the air, an insider admitted. Everyone was waiting for the next move, the next outburst, the next leak. It was impossible to predict, and yet everyone was watching. One of the most shocking revelations from these insiders involved the king's own conduct in the immediate aftermath. According to multiple reports, Charles had initially approached the situation with his characteristic blend of subtle humor and strategic calculation. To some staffers, his demeanor seemed almost playful, a test to see how Meghan would react. But beneath the surface, it was a clear power play. The king knew exactly how to provoke, how to unsettle, and how to turn a seemingly minor act, a title change, into a dramatic assertion of control. And Meghan, for all her experience navigating public life, was not prepared for the precision with which the monarchy had engineered this moment. The leaks also revealed private conversations and whispered exchanges that never reached the media. Aides described tense meetings where Meghan confronted advisors, questioning the rationale behind the title and expressing disbelief that the palace could sanction such a public humiliation. Harry reportedly attempted to mediate, offering counsel and reminding Meghan of the importance of discretion. But the situation was volatile. Meghan's indignation, coupled with the pervasive attention from palace insiders, created a powder keg. You could see it building, one source recounted. Every conversation, every glance, every remark seemed charged. It was like walking on a tightrope with no safety net. Another source, speaking with cautious candor, revealed that some of the leaks were intentional, strategically released to influence public perception. Certain courtiers hoped to cast Meghan as volatile, emotional, or incapable of navigating royal responsibilities. Others aimed to amplify the king's authority, subtly signaling that even a prominent duchess is not immune to palace discipline. The interplay between private indignation and public narrative created a surreal tension, a situation where reality, perception, and media spin converged. Despite the chaos, Meghan's inner circle reportedly remained steadfast. Advisors encouraged patience, emphasizing the importance of strategy over reaction. But Meghan, sources said, was not one to sit quietly. She meticulously documented interactions, monitored the leaks, and began plotting measured responses that would assert her dignity while challenging the narrative being constructed around her. The palace, by contrast, seemed to oscillate between amusement, irritation, and concern, unsure of how far Meghan's next moves might extend. The leaks also illuminated the broader context of royal politics. The monarchy is an institution where hierarchy, reputation, and public image are paramount. Any disruption to the established order can have wide-ranging implications. By labeling Meghan a Duchess of Z-Listers, the palace was not only mocking her personally, it was reinforcing a cultural and social hierarchy, emphasizing that privilege and pedigree often outweigh celebrity and modernity. For Meghan, who had navigated the Hollywood machine and the global media landscape with skill and tenacity, this challenge represented a unique form of pressure. One in which traditional authority collided with contemporary influence, and where public perception could be manipulated as easily as private behavior. Insiders also reported that Meghan's reaction was a mixture of restraint and defiance. She reportedly held private meetings, strategized responses, and consulted with trusted allies outside the palace. Her determination to maintain dignity while asserting agency was apparent. One aide noted, "She was furious, yes, but you could see the wheels turning. This wasn't a woman who would be humiliated without consequence. She was already plotting her next move." Harry, meanwhile, navigated the delicate balance of protecting his wife while preserving his own relationships within the family. Every conversation, every gesture, every expression became a point of analysis, further fueling the tension. Even beyond the palace walls, the leaks shaped the narrative. Journalists, analysts, and commentators picked up fragments of insider information, weaving them into stories that amplified the drama. Social media users debated, shared, and mocked, while traditional media outlets framed the situation as yet another chapter in the ongoing saga of Meghan's life within the royal family. The combined effect was a maelstrom of speculation and intrigue, a situation where private emotion, public perception, and institutional politics collided in a dramatic, highly combustible mix. And yet, despite all the leaks, the most consequential details remained hidden. Sources hinted at additional private moments, conversations, and confrontations that were never meant to reach the public eye. These, insiders suggested, could change the entire narrative if revealed. Meghan's fury, strategic thinking, and potential counteractions were far more dramatic than anyone outside the palace imagined. And as tension continued to mount, it became clear that the leaked stories were just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, a far more complex and explosive situation was unfolding, one that could alter public perception and redefine the dynamics of the royal family. By the end of that week, it was obvious. The palace, the public, and Meghan herself were entering uncharted territory. The leaks had not only exposed private emotions, but had also escalated a situation that might otherwise have been managed discreetly. Every insider, every aide, and every whispered conversation now held potential significance. Meghan's next actions would not merely be reactions. They would be statements, calculated and deliberate, carrying consequences that could ripple across the monarchy and the media. And so, the palace held its collective breath, watching closely as Meghan prepared to respond. Every observer, insider, and public commentator knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning. The Duchess of Z-Listers was no longer a private humiliation, it was a public battleground. The moment the news of Meghan's new title, the Duchess of Z-Listers, leaked beyond the palace walls, the world outside erupted. Social media, news outlets, and celebrity gossip platforms ignited within minutes, turning a private humiliation into a global spectacle. For someone like Meghan, who had meticulously built her image over years in Hollywood and refined it further as a member of the royal family, the blow was immediate and intensely personal. Public perception, reputation, and influence are fragile commodities in her world, and in a single instant, they had been destabilized. The online reaction was electric. Memes flooded timelines, satirical posts circulated, and hashtags like hashtag Duchess of Z-Listers trended within hours. Some were mocking, some sympathetic, but all were viral, spreading faster than palace communications could contain. Fans and critics alike debated the implications, dissecting every facet of Meghan's life, career, and personality. Every gesture she had made in public, every outfit, every smile, was suddenly reframed through the lens of this humiliating title. Her previous accomplishments, advocacy work, public engagements, charitable initiatives, were overshadowed by the irony and ridicule that Z-Lister implied. The media coverage itself became a storm. Headlines ranged from outright ridicule to nuanced critique, but the underlying message was consistent. Meghan had been publicly mocked, and her image was under assault. Tabloids painted her as both victim and provocateur. Analysts questioned whether her Hollywood past, her outspoken nature, and her public relationships had set the stage for this moment. News segments replayed public appearances, scrutinizing body language and facial expressions, attempting to divine whether she was hurt, angry, or plotting her next move. For Meghan, who had once thrived in a world of calculated media appearances, this was a challenge unlike any she had faced. A particularly revealing moment occurred when Meghan attended a previously scheduled public engagement shortly after the leak surfaced. Cameras were waiting, journalists were questioning, and the world was watching. Insiders reported that she entered with a composed smile, her body language calm but firm, projecting dignity despite the internal turmoil. Yet those who knew her closely sensed the tension beneath the surface. Her eyes, quick to scan the crowd, reflected both vigilance and controlled fury. Every step was deliberate, every handshake measured. Meghan understood that in the public arena, perception is reality, and every micro-expression would be dissected for meaning. The impact on her public image extended beyond mere ridicule. Influencers, commentators, and social media personalities began framing her as a polarizing figure. Supporters rallied behind her, emphasizing the cruelty of the title and expressing outrage at the palace's apparent insensitivity. Critics, meanwhile, painted her as overly sensitive or as someone unable to navigate the pressures and traditions of royal life. This dichotomy intensified the scrutiny, creating a cycle in which every statement, appearance, or social media post was magnified and politicized. Meghan's image, carefully curated over years, was now caught in a relentless feedback loop of analysis and judgment. Harry, for his part, was acutely aware of the stakes. His protective instincts flared as he watched his wife navigate the dual pressures of public perception and royal scrutiny. Every glance, every whisper from the media, every viral post represented a challenge he could neither ignore nor fully control. Observers noted that his own behavior became more deliberate, more strategic, as he attempted to shield Meghan while also preserving his position within the monarchy. The delicate balance between family loyalty and public duty was under intense strain, and every decision carried amplified consequences. Interestingly, Meghan's response was not purely reactive. Behind the scenes, her team of advisors and allies began crafting strategies to manage the narrative. They analyzed media coverage, social media trends, and public sentiment, searching for ways to reclaim agency over her image. Press releases, social media statements, and coordinated appearances were planned meticulously, designed to project calm, dignity, and authority while subtly countering the humiliation embedded in the Z-Lister title. Meghan's approach demonstrated her deep understanding of media dynamics. How to use public attention to her advantage, even in moments of personal embarrassment. However, the public scrutiny created emotional spikes that were hard to manage. Sources close to Meghan revealed moments of frustration, anger, and even despair. To be mocked in such a public and enduring manner is a rare experience, even for someone accustomed to fame and attention. The stakes were higher because this was not merely celebrity gossip. It was institutionalized mockery, sanctioned at the highest level of the monarchy. Meghan's emotional response, while controlled in public, was intense in private, involving long discussions with Harry, confidants, and her trusted team. Social media played a particularly significant role in amplifying the crisis. Viral content ranged from satirical commentary to deeply personal critiques. Some users even created fictionalized accounts of palace interactions, speculating about conversations, body language, and private reactions. These posts, while unverified, shaped public perception, feeding a cycle in which the narrative took on a life of its own. For Meghan, this was both familiar and alien, a scenario she had navigated in Hollywood, but now magnified by royal protocols, institutional scrutiny, and the global spotlight. The palace itself was caught in a paradox. On one hand, they needed to maintain decorum, upholding centuries-old protocols and demonstrating authority. On the other, the leaks and viral commentary forced them into a reactive stance, trying to manage a situation that had escalated beyond their control. Courtiers reportedly scrambled to craft statements, advise Meghan on appearances, and monitor social media, but the situation's momentum often outpaced their efforts. The monarchy, an institution built on careful planning and measured gestures, was suddenly reacting to the rapid, unpredictable dynamics of modern media culture. Despite the chaos, Meghan's handling of public appearances demonstrated her resilience and strategic thinking. She leaned into moments of visibility, using them to subtly reframe the narrative. Public smiles, composed interviews, and charitable engagements became acts of quiet defiance, signaling that the title of Duchess of Z-Listers would not define her in the long term. Yet the challenge remained. Every action was scrutinized, every gesture interpreted, and every decision amplified. The pressure was relentless, requiring a combination of emotional fortitude, tactical acumen, and public relations expertise. Sources also revealed that the impact of the title extended to Meghan's broader influence. Invitations, speaking engagements, and philanthropic initiatives were now filtered through the lens of this new perception. Questions arose about whether she could maintain authority, credibility, and public trust in light of the mockery embedded in the title. Critics questioned her relevance, supporters rallied in her defense. And Meghan, acutely aware of both camps, began mapping her next strategic moves. This phase of public fallout was not merely about image. it was about power. In the royal hierarchy, perception shapes influence, and influence dictates access, authority, and respect. Meghan's challenge was to navigate a landscape where personal reputation and institutional authority intersected, where public opinion and private grievance collided, and where every move could trigger further scrutiny or escalate tension. Her next steps, carefully planned and executed, would not only impact her immediate circumstances, but also set a precedent for how royals, especially women marrying into the institution, could respond to public humiliation. As days passed, the intensity of public attention only increased. Analysts and commentators began framing Meghan's experience as emblematic of larger issues: the clash between tradition and modernity, the scrutiny of women in power, and the tensions inherent in balancing personal agency with institutional expectation. Social media campaigns, celebrity commentary, and news features magnified the emotional and reputational stakes. Meghan's image was in flux, caught between ridicule and resilience, between institutional constraint and public assertion. And then came an unexpected twist. While the public debate raged, insiders reported that certain members of the royal household were quietly maneuvering behind the scenes, either to support Meghan or to undermine her further. Whispered conversations, secretive meetings, and strategic leaks created an undercurrent of intrigue that added new layers to an already volatile situation. Meghan was no longer simply reacting to a title. She was navigating a complex web of influence, loyalty, and strategy, where every decision carried heightened consequence. By the end of the week, the reality was clear. Meghan's public image had been fundamentally challenged, and the ripples were spreading far beyond the palace walls. Yet, despite the intense scrutiny, there remained a sense of anticipation. What would Meghan do next? How would she respond to the public, the media, and the institution that had both exalted and humiliated her? The world was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. To truly understand the gravity of Meghan's new title, the Duchess of Z-Listers, we need to step back and examine the centuries-old history of royal titles. Titles are not mere words. They are carefully constructed symbols, steeped in tradition, power, and social hierarchy. In monarchies across Europe, a title can confer prestige, assert authority, or, in rare cases, serve as a subtle instrument of humiliation. Meghan's situation, though modern in its media amplification, has echoes in a long lineage of historical precedents where titles were used not only to honor, but also to mock, chastise, or diminish. Throughout history, monarchs have wielded titles as tools of influence. In medieval England, for example, kings would bestow titles upon allies to solidify loyalty, while carefully withholding them from rivals to signal disfavor. In some cases, titles were outright insulting, designed to undermine a noble's influence or mock their perceived shortcomings. Consider the 16th century practice of assigning diminutive or ironic titles to those who displeased the crown. A noblewoman might be called Lady of the Commons or Duchess of Nothing in private correspondence or ceremonial context, a symbolic act of derision that could resonate socially for decades. This is precisely the historical context that gives Meghan's new designation its sting. The term Z-lister may feel contemporary, playful even, to a casual observer, but in the symbolic framework of monarchy, it functions much like those historical diminutive titles. It reduces status, questions legitimacy, and positions her at the bottom of an invisible hierarchy. The brilliance or cruelty of the move lies in its subtlety. Outwardly, the king can claim he is following protocol or exercising discretion, while the title simultaneously delivers a pointed critique. This is power wielded with surgical precision, a combination of public performance and private messaging that has been honed over centuries. Royal historians point out that the monarchy has always operated in layers of symbolism. A glance during a public ceremony, a seating arrangement at a banquet, even the order of names in an official announcement. Each carries meaning. Titles, in this ecosystem, are the most visible and enduring markers of position and influence. To reassign or alter a title, especially in a mocking fashion, is to rewrite one's place in the social hierarchy, to subtly alter public perception, and to send a coded message to peers, allies, and the public. Meghan's Duchess of Z-Listers designation, therefore, is not just a joke. It is a historically resonant act of social positioning. Interestingly, the history of insults via titles also intersects with gender. Women in royal families have often faced a dual challenge. Their status is derived not only from lineage or marriage, but also from perception. A title can empower or diminish, elevate or ridicule. Historical examples abound where queens, duchesses, and princesses were given titles laced with irony or criticism, often to constrain their influence or publicly assert male authority. In this context, Meghan's title is part of a long lineage of female royals navigating public scrutiny, institutional hierarchy, and personal agency. The implications are profound. It is not simply about media ridicule, but about the intersection of power, gender, and tradition. To further illustrate, consider historical instances in European courts where titles served as subtle humiliation. In France, certain courtesans and peripheral royals were given honorary titles that sounded prestigious but carried no real authority, effectively signaling their marginal status. In England, dukedoms, earldoms, and baronies were occasionally used in ways that reinforced hierarchy while sending private messages of disdain. The royal household, operating in a closed ecosystem of influence, knew that the smallest word or title could ripple across social circles and generations. Meghan's situation mirrors this tradition, albeit in a 21st century context amplified by global media. The irony, of course, is striking. Meghan, whose life and career have been shaped by public perception, media scrutiny, and personal branding, now faces a historical form of institutional critique magnified by modern technology. In centuries past, such a slight might have remained contained within court gossip. Today, it travels across social media, 24-hour news cycles, and international headlines, making the humiliation both immediate and enduring. The interplay of historical precedent and contemporary amplification heightens the stakes, turning what might have been a subtle rebuke into a global spectacle. This historical lens also helps explain why Meghan's reaction was so intense. She is not just a public figure. She is a woman navigating a centuries-old system of codes, symbols, and hierarchies designed to test obedience, loyalty, and composure. The title of Duchess of Z-Listers is not merely a modern insult. It taps into a deep cultural understanding that has evolved over hundreds of years. Meghan, fully aware of this historical resonance, understood instantly that this was more than mockery. It was a challenge, a test, and a warning rolled into one. Moreover, the historical context highlights a pattern. Royal titles can be as much about controlling narrative as conferring honor. Monarchs have long understood that social perception is critical, and they have used titles strategically to shape it. By assigning a public label, a king or queen can subtly shift how an individual is viewed, influencing everything from social alliances to public opinion. In Meghan's case, the Z-Lister designation was an attempt to reposition her not as a peer within the royal hierarchy, but as an outsider, a celebrity figure whose prominence is contingent, superficial, and dependent on media validation rather than institutional respect. This brings us to the paradox Meghan now faces. She has cultivated a global image of influence, advocacy, and authority. She has navigated Hollywood, philanthropy, and public engagement with skill and poise. Yet, within the palace framework, a single title has the power to undermine that entire narrative. This tension between personal achievement and institutional perception is a recurring theme in royal history. Countless women before her have faced similar challenges, balancing individual agency against the rigid expectations of monarchy, navigating personal ambition in a world designed to constrain it, and defending dignity against symbolic humiliation. Insiders note that Meghan's awareness of this history informed her immediate response. Unlike a reactive celebrity, she approached the situation with a blend of strategic thinking and emotional acuity. She understood the symbolic weight of the title, the historical precedent behind it, and the modern media amplification that would follow. Every gesture, every public appearance, every conversation became part of a carefully orchestrated response, informed by both history and contemporary reality. And yet, even with this understanding, the situation was volatile. Historical precedent could inform strategy, but it could not protect against the unpredictability of modern media, the intensity of public scrutiny, or the human response to humiliation. Meghan's challenge was to navigate all three simultaneously: honor tradition, assert personal dignity, and manage global perception. Each element carried its own risks, requiring precise timing, emotional control, and tactical foresight. By the end of this chapter, the historical parallels were clear. Meghan was not simply reacting to a modern insult. She was confronting a centuries-old practice of subtle humiliation, amplified by contemporary media. The Duchess of Z-Listers, while sounding contemporary and perhaps playful, was in fact part of a long lineage of royal power dynamics, a symbolic gesture that carried deep weight and consequence. Meghan's next steps would not only define her public image. They would set a precedent for how modern royals, particularly women marrying into the institution, navigate the intersection of tradition, media, and personal agency. In the midst of the storm, one figure remained steadfast, balancing loyalty, emotion, and strategy: Prince Harry. For years, Harry has lived under the intense glare of public scrutiny, navigating the complex dynamics of royal duty, media attention, and family loyalty. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. His wife, Meghan, humiliated with a title designed to mock, while the eyes of the world scrutinized every reaction. His instincts, honed over decades of life both inside and outside the palace, kicked into overdrive. Harry's initial response was one of private fury. Those closest to the couple describe him as pacing behind the ornate walls of the palace, phone in hand, contemplating potential moves. His protective instincts were immediate. Every leak, every article, every social media post felt like an attack not just on Meghan, but on their shared life, their family, and their sense of agency within an institution that often feels unyielding. He knew the delicate balance: react too forcefully, and it could escalate tensions with the king and palace insiders; react too passively, and Meghan's humiliation could be cemented in public memory. Sources reveal that Harry's first action was to consult with Meghan, ensuring she felt supported, heard, and understood. Their bond, forged through shared challenges and mutual resilience, became the foundation for their response. In private discussions, they analyzed the implications of the title, debated strategies, and considered both immediate and long-term consequences. Harry, as ever, was the calm in the storm, attempting to channel Meghan's understandable fury into a structured, deliberate plan of action. He's protective, but he's also strategic, one insider noted. He wants to defend Meghan, yes, but he also knows they are operating in a high-stakes environment where every move is amplified. Harry's protective instincts extended beyond Meghan's personal well-being. He understood the broader implications of the title for their public image, philanthropic efforts, and relationships within the monarchy. The Duchess of Z-Listers designation was not merely a personal slight. It was a symbolic recalibration of their position, one that could influence public perception and media narratives for years. Harry recognized that allowing the insult to go unchallenged could have ripple effects, subtly eroding influence, credibility, and authority. One insider described a private meeting in which Harry laid out possible responses: a measured public statement, a subtle strategic shift in media appearances, or leveraging allies within the palace to push back against the slight. Each option carried risks and potential rewards, and each required precise timing and execution. Harry, however, was resolute. Protecting Meghan's dignity and autonomy was paramount, and he was willing to navigate the intricate dynamics of the monarchy, media, and public perception to ensure she was defended. Interestingly, sources suggest that Harry's role also involved managing internal palace dynamics. He was acutely aware that the title, while public, had ramifications behind closed doors. Courtiers, advisors, and even family members were watching, interpreting reactions, and subtly influencing perceptions. Harry's awareness of these dynamics allowed him to anticipate potential conflicts and intervene when necessary. He became a bridge between Meghan and the palace machinery, balancing confrontation with diplomacy, emotion with strategy. At the same time, Harry's protective instincts were tested in unexpected ways. The media frenzy created a feedback loop in which every move was analyzed, every statement scrutinized, and every gesture interpreted. Social media commentary, viral memes, and tabloid speculation amplified the emotional stakes, placing additional pressure on both him and Meghan. Insiders described Harry as alternating between moments of frustration, careful deliberation, and quiet resolve, each reaction calibrated to protect Meghan without inflaming tensions further. One particularly telling moment occurred during a public engagement just days after the title announcement. Cameras captured Harry standing beside Meghan, his posture firm and unwavering. Observers noted subtle cues, protective positioning, attentive glances, and gestures that suggested both reassurance and vigilance. He remained composed in front of the public, even as privately he navigated complex negotiations with advisors, strategists, and palace insiders. It was a delicate dance, balancing visibility, influence, and protection in a situation charged with both emotion and symbolism. Sources also highlight Harry's emotional labor in this period. Protecting Meghan was not merely about strategy. It involved empathy, reassurance, and the management of shared stress. He listened to her fears, validated her feelings, and offered counsel, all while confronting his own anger at the perceived injustice. Their partnership, in this sense, became a microcosm of resilience under pressure. Two individuals navigating a complex, high-stakes environment while remaining committed to mutual support. The insider accounts also reveal moments of tension and disagreement, natural given the intensity of the situation. Harry and Meghan, though aligned in purpose, sometimes differed on approach. Meghan's instinct for immediate, visible action sometimes clashed with Harry's preference for measured, behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Yet these differences were resolved through discussion, strategy, and shared understanding of the stakes. Their dynamic, while tested, emerged stronger, a testament to the depth of their partnership and the intensity of their shared mission, protecting dignity and reclaiming narrative control. Equally important was Harry's awareness of the symbolic nature of the title. He understood that defending Meghan was not just about personal loyalty. It was about countering a public narrative engineered to diminish her influence. By strategically managing appearances, communications, and private interactions, Harry sought to reclaim the narrative while subtly signaling that the palace's attempt to belittle her would not succeed. His actions were both protective and proactive, combining emotion, strategy, and public diplomacy in a high-stakes environment. Insiders also reported that Harry began mobilizing external allies, including media consultants, advisors, and public figures sympathetic to Meghan's plight. This network provided critical support, offering strategic insights, messaging guidance, and psychological reinforcement. Harry's ability to balance internal palace diplomacy with external strategic partnerships became a defining element of their response. It was an unprecedented level of coordination, reflecting both the complexity of the situation and the depth of his protective instincts. Even as he navigated these challenges, Harry remained acutely aware of the potential consequences of missteps. The palace, after all, operates in a highly codified environment where gestures, words, and appearances carry weight. Any overt confrontation could trigger backlash. Any miscalculated statement could fuel media speculation. Yet Harry's approach, blending restraint, strategy, and emotional support, allowed him to guide Meghan while maintaining composure in the public eye. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that Harry's role was pivotal. He was more than a supportive spouse. He was a strategic partner, an emotional anchor, and a mediator in an environment designed to amplify pressure and scrutinize every action. His protective instincts were matched by his strategic acumen, allowing Meghan to navigate the humiliation of the Duchess of Z-Listers title with both dignity and resolve. But as Harry and Meghan prepared for the next public engagement, insiders reported a shocking development. The king himself would make a statement that could upend everything they had planned, and it would send shockwaves across the palace and the media alike. The tension that had simmered behind palace walls reached a boiling point when King Charles made his first public comment about Meghan's new title. What should have been a routine engagement turned into a seismic event. Sources indicate that the king, in his characteristic blend of subtle humor and strategic calculation, delivered a remark that instantly captured global attention, a sly, public acknowledgement of Meghan as the Duchess of Z-Listers. The words, seemingly offhand, carried the full weight of royal authority, turning a private slight into a worldwide spectacle. Within minutes, journalists, paparazzi, and royal commentators were dissecting every syllable. News outlets scrambled to report, analyze, and interpret. Social media exploded. Memes, reaction videos, and commentary threads flooded platforms like wildfire. The king's remark was no mere joke. It was a masterstroke of public humiliation, amplified by the immediacy of modern communication channels. Analysts called it a perfectly timed royal jibe, while critics decried the cruelty of using a public forum to mock a family member. Behind the scenes, Meghan and Harry were caught in a complex web of emotion and strategy. Meghan, sources say, felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and steely determination. Every instinct screamed for a reaction, yet every advisor cautioned restraint. Public emotion, while understandable, could be weaponized against her. Harry, standing beside her, recognized both the personal insult and the broader implications. The king had not only mocked Meghan personally, but had signaled to the world that her place in the monarchy was precarious, that her influence and standing could be questioned at any moment. Insiders report that the immediate aftermath within the palace was chaotic. Courtiers and aides whispered in corridors, discussing possible responses and potential damage control strategies. Some were amused, others sympathetic, yet all understood the historical significance of the moment. Publicly mocking a family member, particularly one married into the monarchy, was a rare and risky maneuver, but Charles's delivery was precise, calculated, and unmistakable. He had transformed a symbolic insult into a media event. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented. Television networks interrupted programming to cover the king's remark. Newspapers splashed headlines across front pages. Social media algorithms prioritized content, ensuring that memes, commentary, and reactions reached millions within minutes. Journalists speculated on the king's motives, some portraying it as playful ribbing, others as a calculated exercise in asserting dominance. Public opinion was split. Supporters of Meghan expressed outrage and sympathy, while critics framed it as a humorous or justified rebuke. The global spotlight intensified, placing Meghan and Harry under pressure unlike any they had experienced before. One particularly illustrative example occurred during an international news broadcast. Analysts debated the implications of the title, questioning how it might affect Meghan's public image, philanthropic initiatives, and potential future influence within the monarchy. Clips of Meghan attending events were replayed with commentary, analyzing posture, expression, and demeanor for signs of her response. Every gesture, smile, or pause was scrutinized, turning ordinary appearances into fodder for a global audience eager to witness the unfolding drama. Inside the palace, the tension escalated. Insiders describe a palace-wide ripple effect, with aides, courtiers, and advisors recalibrating their positions, anticipating possible fallout. Some feared that Meghan's anger could lead to a confrontation or public statement that would further strain family relations. Others speculated that the king's remark was a test, measuring Meghan's reaction, the loyalty of staff, and the public's response. Every eye was watching, every whisper was analyzed, and every movement became part of the larger narrative. Sources suggest that Meghan's response was a combination of restraint and strategy. Publicly, she maintained composure, projecting dignity and poise despite the insult. Privately, she and Harry began drafting a multi-layered approach, controlling the narrative through selective media engagement, strategic social media messaging, and careful public appearances. The goal was clear: assert authority, reclaim dignity, and subtly counteract the humiliation without appearing reactive. Every action was a calculated step in a high-stakes chess game, where the audience numbered in the millions and the consequences were far-reaching. The media frenzy also revealed a cultural clash: modern celebrity culture versus centuries-old monarchy. Meghan's life in Hollywood had trained her to navigate scrutiny, viral attention, and media spin. The monarchy, by contrast, operates on tradition, symbolism, and hierarchy. When Charles's comment hit the public sphere, these two worlds collided. Social media users, accustomed to fast-paced, humorous, and sometimes cruel commentary, amplified the slight, creating a feedback loop that both mocked and analyzed Meghan. Traditional media struggled to contextualize the moment within royal history, often juxtaposing ridicule with historical analysis. The effect was a perfect storm of visibility, scrutiny, and pressure. Analysts also noted that the king's public jibe served multiple functions simultaneously. It reinforced hierarchy within the royal family, subtly reminded Meghan of her position relative to tradition, and signaled to courtiers and advisors that the monarchy maintained authority over internal matters. It was at once personal, institutional, and performative, demonstrating how a single remark could operate on multiple levels in a tightly controlled environment. Meghan, fully aware of this, understood that navigating the situation would require strategic finesse, emotional resilience, and careful public positioning. As the days progressed, the frenzy intensified. Social media algorithms favored content related to Meghan's reaction, generating viral discussions, debates, and speculation. Commentary ranged from sympathetic analyses highlighting the cruelty of the insult to critical perspectives framing her as overly sensitive or entitled. Every news cycle renewed attention, ensuring that the king's jibe remained a central topic for weeks. Meghan's every move, public and private, was amplified.